Guys, it's been 8 years. How does time fly by this quickly? I'm serious. It's 8 full years since Europa Universalis 4 came out, which I suppose makes sense, because how else could I have spent well over 2,000 hours in this game? EU4 is probably my most played game ever, and that says something for a guy who, just a year earlier, had never even played a Paradox game. So, seeing as 8 years have come and gone, and that EU4 has changed drastically since 2013? That's right, 2013! I thought it was time to jump back into this absolute marvel, sit down with the main game and expansions, and give you an overview, analysis, and review of the entire game. Despite the name, EU4 is so much more than just Europe. Hence the name Universalis probably, right? A metric ton of changes have been made to this game over the years, so this video will focus on what Europa Universalis 4 is right now. And if you'd leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon, it would really help me out. And so, this is Europa Universalis 4 in 2021, 8 years in the making. EU4 released at an opportune time for Paradox. Crusader Kings 2 launched only 1 year earlier, undeniably breaking new ground for the company and being the first game in Paradox's history to become something of a mainstream phenomenon. But instead of taking place during the medieval era, Europa Universalis starts basically right around when CK2 ends, in 1444. This is a different world than 1066, or should I say 867. In 1444, Europe is at its most powerful in centuries, having recently reconquered the Iberian Peninsula from the Moors far to the west. But in the east, a near unstoppable force is about to descend on the continent, with the Ottomans soon to be conquering the last vestige of the old Byzantine Empire and jewel of the world, Constantinople. But saying that Europe is at its most powerful doesn't necessarily mean much. France is on the offense and eager to reclaim their lands held by England, but must contend with the powerful Burgundian force at its borders. In Italy, tiny merchant republics have an opportunity for glory, but must rely on powerful allies to achieve it. In Russia, Muscovy is eyeing an opportunity for lightning expansion by subjugating its tiny neighbors. And in Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire is a patchwork of duchies and princedoms held together by a weak emperor. But perhaps Europe's only union can come together in time, combining its armies and economies to create a Reich of unparalleled might. And then we have the North, where Norway and Sweden are vassals of Denmark in a relationship which most likely will sour fairly soon. This is Europe in 1444. And it is indeed the place to be. But seeing as this is a Paradox game, it's not the only place to be. In the Middle East, Egypt, Turkic and Persian kingdoms vie for power, while in the Far East, Ming enjoys its vast dominion as a hegemon of China, for now. And just across the narrow sea, the Japanese clans are warring over the shogunate, but perhaps one day, one clan may rise above the others and claim dominion over the entire island. In Africa, the different kingdoms and tribes have but a few centuries to prepare for coming foreign invasions, but true development and unifications might just do the trick if new technology can be learned in time. And in the Americas, the Aztecs and countless other factions stand in a similar position, but maybe a grim future can be turned on its head, invading lions becoming frightened cats instead. It is a time of faith, a time of kings,
a time of total.
Oh, never mind, that's another game. But still, it is a time of empires. So, this is the state of the world in 1444. No state is yet powerful enough to dominate the world, not even the largest of powers can hope to topple a pack of starving wolves at the wrong time. But with years and dedication, empires will rise, others will fall, and perhaps you'll even make it to the end date without being in crippling debt. We've made it this far without saying the magic words, so I guess it's time. Europa Universalis 4 is a real-time grand strategy game a la Paradox Development Studios. This means that the entire game is played in real time, day by day. And even though it's possible to pause the game and make decisions without the days moving by, every other state and faction are doing the same. This stands in stark contrast to turn-based games where every faction takes their turn one at a time. This tiny fact creates an extremely active game where anything may happen at any time, taking you completely by surprise if you're not paying attention. The only downside to Paradox's massively deep games is the fact that there are no real-time tactical battles like in Total War. But what it lacks in cinematic action, it more than makes up for in strategic bonbons and extremely satisfying diplomatic and empire-building mechanics. And oh boy, I guess we're starting this journey too now. The question is, where to even begin? There are so many main concepts in EU4 that it's truly hard to know where to start. But I guess we'll begin at the state level, or a bit more meta than that. What kind of states exist in EU4? In many strategy games, factions will be cosmetically different, but the actual gameplay, the way states are managed, won't be that different at all. In Shogun 2, every faction basically plays the same, save for starting locations and certain units. In Medieval 2, every faction literally plays the same, only some of the factions belong to different religions, and some have access to the Pope Mobile. In Europa Universalis, however, every state belongs not only to different religions and cultures, but they swear to one of many regime types and administrations. In Europe alone, government types vary from kingdoms, princedoms, duchies, monastic orders, republics, and many more. There are essentially 4 big government types, and these are monarchies, republics, theocracies, and tribal governments. In addition, there are government ranks, which are based on the size and power of the state in question. There are exactly 3 government ranks, beginning at the duchy rank for the smallest states, and moving up to kingdom size for the more powerful, and the empire rank for only the most glorious of hegemons. So what does all this jargon stuff mean in practice? Well, if you're a European monarchy, chances are you can join in the most fun game of all, the game of love. And by the game of love, I mean that game where you marry off your children in order to forge alliances and good relations with other kingdoms. What's more, if you played the royal game really well, or you're just insanely lucky, or you're a Habsburg, you may get the opportunity to inherit entire countries in one fell swoop, becoming the dominating partner in a royal union between 2 or more states. And when you're not doing it as Austria, it feels even better. This means that you can essentially contest your right to inherit foreign thrones, potentially throwing the continent into massive succession wars like the ones that indeed happened in our own history. Monarchs have a legitimacy rating which affects the stability and indeed legitimacy of your ruling monarch, which in turn decides how rulers see you, how willing your soldiers are to fight for you, or how loyal your population is. You know, whether they want to overthrow you or not. The legitimacy also factors into how likely you are to actually becoming the leading partner in a royal union. So there's a whole lot to think about. Moreover, Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, I can't believe how much there is to think about in this game. Everything is connected, but it's so good, I'm not complaining. Every monarch lends the nation so-called Monarch Points, which are the sort of magical values that determine almost everything in the game. You develop your nation, counter inflation, stamp down revolts, and develop new technology entirely based on Monarch Points. So how smart or capable your monarch is at any point can determine a whole lot for the future of your kingdom. The worst a monarch can be is literally doing nothing by giving you 0 points into either point group, or giving a maximum of 6, which is essentially genius status. It is therefore incredibly empowering when your monarch is such a genius, and something of a doomsday scenario when they're closer to the bottom of the scale, as they will probably remain monarch for around 30 to 60 years depending on when they become ruler, and if you're willing to have them abdicate for a massive prestige loss. Republics, naturally, cannot marry their children off to others, since they don't have any royal babies, and so do not partake in this royal pyramid scheme. But not all republics are the same. Some are merchant republics like Venice, others are Italian signorias like Florence. But what they have in common is the fact that they both need to adhere to the republican tradition mechanic if they want to remain republics. Depending on how you want your republics to evolve, you can choose your next leader's capability in an election based on whether you want to develop your nation's military, administration, or diplomatic powers. And you can even choose to support varying factions in the Republic. Again, depending on what you wish to focus on, like the Navy or the Army. Here, Monarch Points factor in once again, but this time, you can actually choose the skill of your leader. The only catch is that they will be really good in one area, for example giving you 4 administrative points a month, while only giving you 1 point in the 2 other categories. However, if you want to jeopardize your Republic by doing a little trolling, and electing the same guy time after time, you actually get the benefit of increasing the person's skill by 1 whole point in each area every time, potentially giving you a genius ruler at the cost of Republican tradition. Government types also govern parts of your relationship with other states, increasing or decreasing your relationship status based on your respective systems of government, and your option to increase or decrease it. Then we have tribal governments, often used by factions on the outskirts of more centralized states. Often nomadic to begin with, meaning that they're not really locked to the same provinces as proper feudal states are, Native American tribal governments are quite different from the Cossack tribal government, often in how their legitimacy is presented, or in which events that happened, and allow for further development of the faction. Now these are some of the most common forms of government, but as stated, there are more out there. just waiting for you to explore them. Depending on your culture and location, you can even get unique events, making for a truly flavored experience. For example, Byzantium unlocks unique factions events to reconquer the empire if they can survive that long, and as a shogunate, several events involving the development of Japan or peacemaking between its warring factions impact your game state, often even allowing you to choose a path, sometimes offering you gold and glitter, other times misery and sided comments. What's really fun though, is when a government is part of a completely different type of government still. This is for example the case for the members of the Holy Roman Empire. Here, each member is a kind of subject of the emperor, who can be chosen by a number of electors every time the former emperor dies. But it's not only the emperor who gets bonuses. Depending on the state of the empire, meaning how many imperial edicts the emperor has managed to issue, each member receives various bonuses to different parts of their state. At the same time, the emperor is obligated to protect each member state of the empire, meaning that if a foreign power decides to try to invade an imperial province, the emperor and their allies will likely come to their aid, making a foreign attack on the empire a highly dangerous situation. On the other hand, if the emperor enacts enough reforms, they can amass too much centralized power, eventually forming a fully functional one-state Holy Roman Empire as intended by God himself. The same goes for the system in China, where there is one hegemon ruling over other member states. This is also a decentralized system, but one much more focused on money, because member states of the Chinese Empire are effectively tributaries of the emperor, providing gold each month to the ruling faction. I also especially love the little golden icons down on the right side of the screen. It's just so much nice immersion, exactly what I play this game for. But friends, there's more to this game than governments. There's also religion. We might not be in the medieval times anymore, but it will be quite a stretch to say that religion is anything less of a factor. This is, after all, the era of the religious 30 Years' War. Religion in EU4 serves almost the same role as governments more or less, but in different aspects of the game. For example, monarchs cannot enter royal marriages with factions from other religions, and they will like factions from other religions less purely based on that fact. Catholic countries must adhere to the Pope and the College of Cardinals, which they can use the papal influence power points to nudge one way or another. Accumulating enough papal points even allows you to increase the stability or tax income of your kingdom for a duration, and can therefore be extremely useful at the right time. If a crusade is called, every Catholic nation fighting the faction in question will also get a huge boost in morale and attack power while fighting said faction. So remaining loyal to the Pope is not necessarily a bad thing, even though, if you are on bad terms for one reason or another, he might just decide to excommunicate you, meaning that other Catholic nations may wage war on you in the name of the Lord. Of course, this changes completely once you belong to any of the other branches of Christianity, be it Protestantism, which develops later on, or Orthodoxy, present in much of Eastern Europe. Each of these latter two are much more independent and free-moving, allowing each of these to choose mechanisms which pushes their faction toward whatever goal they want. Protestants can, for example, enact church edicts which increases their settler increase in the colonies, tax income, or production values, while Orthodoxy, which is also rather independent, is honestly extremely cool. The reason why I think Orthodoxy is especially cool is because of the two mechanics related to Patriarch Authority and Icons. The deal with Patriarch Authority is that actions you execute and decisions you make influence its value, for example giving you a boost to missionary strength or decreases your local unrest. The fun part is that every Patriarch Authority is linked to each individual country, so one nation's authority does not affect another's. Then we have Icons, which are more like massive focuses you decide to enact for a longer period of time, and they can greatly aid you with construction costs, civil unrest, or relations with other factions. And believe me, you'll need it. Islamic countries are not as unified, and that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, as the Catholic countries, but in return, they do get to personalize their faith a lot more. Every Muslim nation can choose which branch of Islam it wishes to follow, going even deeper than the traditional Sunni and Shia divide by having you choose between varying branches even within the two of them, giving you bonuses to your nation depending on your situation and what you choose. In addition, every 20 years, you have the ability to choose a faction focus which will massively impact your faction, allowing you to, for example, vastly increase your tax income or your army capabilities. There are many other belief systems out there, like the Japanese Shinto religion or more spiritual-centric ones, and they all have their own unique systems which makes for vastly different experiences depending on who you're playing as. And with that, we're moving on to the mission system. You see, EU4 is clearly a massive, ginormous, all-encompassing game. You're free to do whatever you want and never have to ever follow or maintain a predetermined path. But in a game this vast, it certainly helps to have some leads or at least the option of direction. And this is where the mission trees come in. Mission trees actually came quite late in the game, as late as 2018 in fact, but completely changed how EU4 is approached. Essentially, every major faction and certain other lucky ones have unique mission trees tailored specifically to that nation. Think of them as focus trees in Hearts of Iron 4, only not as necessary or integral. The missions are essentially opportunities for the player to be rewarded for their actions, and as a rule, they more or less follow each nation's historical path to victory, but often even go much further than that. They can give you much needed stability, Monarch Points, or other bonuses, but the most awesome ones deal with conquering other nations or even vassalizing them. For this fact, I love the mission trees of countries like Austria and France the most, as they deal with the heart of Europe. But this goes for all such mission trees. Some are even hugely important, especially if we're talking about relatively minor nations like the ones in the newly released Origins expansion. It's also a big plus that the artwork for each and every one is so superbly made and really blends well with the rest of the UI. Oh, and Paradox desperately need to give us a line of the North Immersion Pack with an updated mission tree for Norway. Snälla och tusen tack. In other game-changing structure-making mechanics, we have the institutions and Aegis system. As we know, EU4 takes place over the span of about 400 years. Without anything to really compartmentalize this, EU4 becomes something of a long line of war and peace. But include it, and we have a game with some very much needed and definable time periods. Each age lasts for 90 years and represents the 4 different time periods of the game. Each one allows you to unlock certain modifiers unique to that age, and certain factions that historically had an edge during the selected period can unlock powers which really unlocks their potential. If you unlock enough age bonuses, you can even spawn a golden age that will last 50 years, but only once, so make sure you know when you would benefit the most from one. Now for every age, there are about 2 so-called institutions, meaning there are 8 in total. Institutions spawn about every 50 years, and are basically ways for the game to tell you that new ideas are in motion. Examples of institutions are the Renaissance, the printing press, and the Enlightenment, and they can bring some huge benefits with time. Here's the kicker though. Institutions spawn based on provinces in the game meeting certain modifiers, meaning that it's possible to kind of prepare and attempt to have as many institutions spawn within your realm. This is a massive bonus to your nation, since in order to actually embrace an institution nationally, you need to have enough provinces in your realm having already embraced it, and at least 10% if you want to cash out and spend a large lump sum for the institution. But doing so grants you potential prestige and Monarch Points, and allows you to stay ahead in the innovation game, which impacts the next section we're diving into. Very little in EU4 can be done without its technology and idea system, which, much like the rest of the mechanics, impacts almost everything you do. Do you now see how intertwined this game is with itself? I swear this must have taken ages to develop, like 8 years and then some or something. Anyway, technology is divided into 3 sections: administrative, diplomatic, and military. These unsurprisingly correspond with the same type of Monarch Points, and in EU4, the technology race is real. The reason why it's so important is partially because this is where you upgrade your army level, and better soldiers and cannons will, if a few levels higher, absolutely slaughter the outdated ones. In the same vein, administrative points will open up the opportunity to build important buildings, and diplomatic tech will increase your naval and colonial range, all very important things. However, the administrative tech is also especially vital, because if you level it enough, you actually get to open up your idea groups. This is where your nation can truly set itself apart, and where you're able to specialize in various fields of state, depending on your playstyle. Want to create a colonial empire? Or what about a trade one? Or how about a combination? You'll need a powerful navy for sure. Or maybe a land empire is better, with a powerful army that goes beyond anything else acquired by ordinary technology upgrades. Chances are you're going to focus on a bit of both, but it's completely up to you. And the feeling of rush when acquiring new much needed technology and ideas is next to none in this game. Everything is ticking and increasing somewhere, even if it's just your debt. Hopefully it's not your debt. This brings us to the estate system, which is one of my favorite systems. Essentially, estates make up a big chunk of your internal politics, as you'll have to balance the wishes of the nobility, bourgeois, and the clergy depending on where you are. All of these want as much power and land in the realm as possible, but of course, the crown needs to maintain some of its own. At any given time, the estates control a portion of your realm, and you can allocate land to them, which will make them more or less loyal to you. You'll have to balance their power with their loyalty though, and each of these will contribute towards vital positive or negative factors which can spell glory or doom for your nation. The reason why I love it so much is because it really does add a lot of gameplay and complexity to EU4's peacetime sessions, which you'll probably have a lot of. It's also not that complicated of a mechanic on its own, and it actually feels really good once you're managing, in the later game, to accumulate a lot of land on your own, balancing their loyalty with their power, and gaining some sick positive effects for your own country. As you probably can tell by now, EU4 is indeed a leviathan of a game. To put it all together like this is a challenge, but it's also fascinating to think about how much complexity there is to deal with here. EU4 takes us on a journey from the early modern period to the Napoleonic Wars, almost 400 years of globe-spanning alternate history action. Whether you're playing as a smaller nation or massive powerhouse, you'll deal with unique challenges and possibilities. Covering the map in your own color, or those of your vassals, is up to you. And whether to become a big blue blob or a trade empire, EU4 lets you do it. It's a game of groundbreaking twists and turns, whether that be in the stability disaster of a peasant war, of a royal marriage that turns a regional power into a contender for world hegemony, or in massive religious or revolutionary wars that have the capability of leveling nations and raise up others. You can indeed restore the Eastern Roman Empire, conquer the world as a kingdom of God, or follow history more closely. And I'm saying more because the mostly really good AI will make sure history is not followed fully. If it's not clear, I love Europa Universalis 4, as I should, with my 2000 hours and all. All of the reasons mentioned come together in a game that, even though it sometimes stumbles, never stays down. EU4 is not just a great strategy game, but it's probably the best strategy game in the history of strategy games based on its sheer depth, its scope, its endless possibilities, masterfully composed music by Andreas Valdetoft, which continues to mesmerize me to this day, especially the Christmas Yuletide songs, and the variety and diversity in gameplay options. Do I wish Norway had a unique mission tree? Sure. I mean, who doesn't, right? But it doesn't ruin the experience completely, and that is a massive achievement. EU4 has been out for 8 years, and in that time, it's changed massively. In 2013, there was no state mechanic, no mission trees, no trade leagues, no hegemon mechanic, no deep Holy Roman Empire mechanic that lets you unify the empire or take it into a more decentralized direction, no deep Mandate of Heaven in China mechanic, no industrialization mechanics like the advent of coal and spinning Jenny events, no Aegis, no institutions, no innovations, and the list goes on. And those are just a large surface level mechanics, not all the countless quality of life level mechanics that completely litter the game. I've tried to make a complete overview over EU4 DLC worth buying and what each expansion brings to the game, so if you're interested in a deeper dive into that, then make sure to check it out. Also remember that you can actually subscribe to the DLC now, so you don't even have to splurge to receive all the goodies available for this game. Put together, EU4 is a true masterpiece, a grand achievement unparalleled in the gaming industry. It offers so much diversity, so much depth and unforeseen consequence. It's a game about states and empires, but in reality, it's almost like its own little game of life. Things seem tougher in bad times, and suffering from low stability or debt often means other bad things will pile on. The opposite is true in good times, but whether good or bad, you'll have to deal with whatever comes at you, and your decisions, and a little luck, will ultimately decide whether you come out on top or not. And while the UI might be a bit complicated for some seeing as it came out before Paradox's UI design revolution in Hearts of Iron, Stellaris, and CK3, it's perfectly serviceable, and I honestly love it for its complexity and stylish look. It will take some time to learn, but once you've reached that point, you'll never want anything else. I highly recommend Europa Universalis all these years later, and congratulate Paradox for having made perhaps the most complete and all-encompassing strategy game of all time. Thank you so much for watching. EU4 is a massive game, and I tried to put as many mechanics into this video as possible without making it incomprehensibly complex and long. Please let me know your thoughts on the video and on EU4 in the comments, and if you'd leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon, it would really help me out. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!